Randy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Jack.
All right. So my screen shows you in a large image, and then there's a smaller image with just 5 of us or 4 of us.
Oh, there's not. You can't see the flyer that says South Brunswick Historical Society.
Oh, it's in the background, I think.
Huh. Let me think.
Yes, we can see that, Randy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now I have it.
Okay. So we're gonna, we'll give a few minutes because we had a good number of people signed up. So we'll start in a few minutes. And I see, I think Ed Belding's on the line. So.
Good thinking, Randy. I
Yeah.
am here.
Hey, Ed, how are you?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Okay. Okay. Getting everything together here.
Right. How are the crops?
The crops are pretty good, I think, from what I can see.
Oh, okay. You're not one of those pessimistic farmers, I see.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll find out more tonight.
Okay. Well, that's good. I got lots of information, and I'm raring to go.
Okay. So far we have like about 14 people, so we'll give it a couple more minutes and then we'll go from there. I don't want to start too late, but it's just 6:30 now, so we're good.
Right. That'll give us enough time to watch the grass grow.
Yeah.
Before we get into serious subjects. So that sounds good.
Okay.
Yes.
Uh-oh, somebody might need to mute.
Hello, Randy.
Hi. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm happy to be here.
Good. Good to see you. Good to see you. I think we have a decent crowd tonight. Let's see, we have 16, and I think I'm going to go ahead and start. And we start by saying, hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Randy Marsola from the South Brunswick Library. Tonight, we'll be discussing farmers and farming in South Brunswick. Joining me tonight is Township Historian Ed Belding, and I believe Pat Romano from the South Brunswick Historical Society is going to join us too. Our guest speaker tonight is Jack Barclay of Barclay's Orchardside Farms. He'll be talking about his years of living and working on the family farm in the 60s and 70s. And I believe Jerry might be joining us too. I can't see the list, but Jerry Barclay of Barclay Farms, or right now it's a Barclay Trees Farm, will be here tonight too, I believe. So, okay, Ed, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Okay, Randy, thanks. I wanted to start with 2 quotes. One is anonymous, but may have been from the South Brunswick area. And the other is Richard Ilnicki, who is quite well known, or was quite well known in South Brunswick. This sort of, in a nutshell, explains everything from the very beginning to what's going on today, as far as farming and agriculture and farmers are concerned in South Brunswick. The anonymous quote reads as follows: "Whatever may be one's interest or accomplishment, humans owe their very existence to 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains." That's some farming philosophy for you. Richard Ilnicki said back in the 1970s, "South Brunswick has some of the best soil in the country. It is so good, warehouses grow in it." And that sort of brings us up to the present with that quote.
I just wanted to give us a quick picture. I'm scrolling through here, and I have a picture at the end of, I have a lot of slides here. Sorry about this. There's Richard Ilnicki there with Congressman Rush Holt. So that's Rich Ilnicki, and he was part of the library board and also the mayor of South Brunswick. 2 times, right, Ed?
Believe so, yes. And also into farming.
Right.
Okay. A lot of the information that I gathered, I have to give credit to a person named Waben Kruger. Waben Kruger was a resident of South Brunswick, but his claim to fame was establishing the Cook College Farmers Museum on the Cook College campus right off of Route 1. And Wabin Kruger was a collector of farm machinery, implements, and so forth, and he donated a lot of stuff to that museum. At one time, it was open to the public. I don't know if it's open or not. I know they closed it down a few years ago, and I think it's worth opening up again, but a lot of South Brunswick stuff is in that museum. So if they ever open it up again and you get a chance, I would recommend that you visit that museum. It's up at the farm area that they have for Cook College, and it's pretty easy to find once you get up there.
Okay.
Okay. I want to start with the setting. The setting would include the climate, the land. In other words, what was there when the first farmers planted seeds and got something from the soil. As you may or may not know, South Brunswick Township is made up of two geographic regions, the intercoastal plain and the Piedmont section. The Piedmont section runs east of Route 27, and then on the west side of Route 27. The intercoastal plain is most of South Brunswick, and that starts when you dip down there and you're headed towards Route 130. So it's where the railroad tracks go through, where the highways go through 130 and Turnpike. So you're familiar with that. Obviously, the best farming in the area would be along the intercoastal plain. We are in a broad undulating area. There are some gently rolling hilly sections, and there are some flat sections. The soil is a loose sandy makeup of dark brown soils, coarse to silt loam. They're described as mellow, friable, easily tilled, and medium to strongly acidic. This area, before farming really took root, to use an ironic phrase, was heavily forested. Oaks, walnut, black locust, hickory, maples, poplar, basswood, birch, and beech, and so on. And a lot of the land had to be cleared in order to set up fields for farming. There are some swampy areas still in South Brunswick. You're familiar with Pigeon Swamp. You may not be too familiar with Barnett Swamp, but there are some swampy areas, and those wouldn't be good for farming unless they were drained. As far as the climate, it's called continental oceanic. The winds are prevailing northwest in the winter and southwest in the summer. Rainfall average is 40 to 48 per year, evenly distributed, and that's a good sign for farmers. The drainage areas, you may be familiar with some of the brooks, but the Ireland Brook, Lawrence Brook, Devil's Brook, Heathcote Brook provide drainage of the area. A thing you may or may not know is that the growing season on average over all these years that we're going to cover is roughly 240 days, which is another bonus for farmers. Okay, Randy, I'm finished with the setting background. I don't know if you have more pictures to show or want to make some comments, but I'm finished with that part.
Well, no, it's just I have a picture of the Pigeon Swamp up here from our archives and a farm in Monmouth Junction. But no, I don't have anything more specific. The next set of pictures I have will be the earliest farmers with the Lenape. So that'll be the next set. Next thing I have.
Good. Okay, so I'm ready with that.
Okay.
Lenni Lenape, that's an Indian tribe that was part of what they call the Delaware Nation. The Delaware Nation is a European term given to the Native Americans. They wouldn't use that term. The Native Americans prefer their tribal name, so Lenni Lenape for the South Brunswick area would fit. Very small in number in our township, before it was a township. They're a passive group of Native Americans. They're not warlike, and they were doing some farming. They're basically hunter-gatherers, but they did some farming, and that was a woman's job. And the crops that they did farm would include maize, corn, of course, beans, squash, and some tobacco. Very primitive techniques for the farming. And of course, they would do this in some cleared areas. And one of the ways that they got rid of trees was to burn them down. They also used some of those trees to build canoes, burning out the internal part there and making canoes out of tree trunks. The areas of possibility, as far as I can tell, there were only two in the South Brunswick area that I know of. That would be along the banks of the Millstone River and up from there in the Kingston area, and then the Indian Fields area, which was named after Native Americans who probably did some farming as well as hunting and gathering in that area. So you have one that's associated with the Piedmont area and one that's associated with the intercoastal plain. The closest big one, or bigger than the two I mentioned, was at the mouth of the 6 Mile Run where it empties into the Millstone River. But that's in Somerset County. So that really doesn't count for us. So the evidence, the artifacts and so forth are rare. And the main reason is because there weren't too many Native Americans in the area. Okay, Randy, I'm finished with that part.
Okay, the next slide I have is the early European farmers in South Brunswick.
Okay, you have two waves of European farmers. In the 1700s, and interestingly enough, this is easy to remember because the first European farmers in the South Brunswick area start at the year 1700. So you have 100 years of the original European settlers starting to do farming in the area. Now, as I said, they had to do a lot of clearing of forested areas. That's both in the Piedmont region and in the intercoastal plain region. The groups that you had in there would be the English, the Dutch, the Scots, the Irish, some Huguenot French, and we can't forget the African Americans who did a lot of farming as slaves for the Europeans who owned slaves at the time. Some of the names of the big farmers in the early years, you had Jedediah Higgins. He's probably your first one. Then you had the Combs family, C-O-M-B-S, the Terhunes, the Bucklews, the Proboscos, the Van Dykes, the Van Pelts, the Pettys, and the Rues, R-U-E. Now, after the 1700s, when you get into the 1800s, especially the middle of the 1800s, you have Europeans coming in, not only from those areas, but also from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. So that would include the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Italians, Ukrainians, Russians. And so the expansion, as far as farming is concerned, and an explosion of farming is going to happen in the 1800s. The launching time would be well before the Civil War. Now, along with the farmers come the Europeans who also established additional types of things that go along with farming. There were the mills, such as Davidson's Mill. There were hay presses, such as the Wheeler and Thomas hay press at Dean Station.
It's funny. I have the hay press up here on there, and I have a picture from our archives of the Dayton hay press. I just wanted to mention that to you.
Good, good. And you have Snedeker's on Hay Press Road. You had blacksmiths such as John Owens in Kingston. You had wheelwrights such as J.W. Shawn, August and Edward Schwartz, Gene Witkowski. Two of those are from Dayton, and before it was called Dayton, it was called Crossroads. Later on, late in the 1800s, you had fertilizer and pest chemical supply places. The Dillatush Fertilizer Company in Dayton. You had Bennett and Clayton in Monmouth Junction, Chamberlain and Barclay in Cranberry, and Simmons and Mount in Cranberry. And you also had farm equipment outfits. One that comes to mind is Lewis Rowland on Georges Road in Dayton.
And I have a question for you. With the hay
Yeah.
presses, Seal Leadham, she was the township historian and the person that set up the archives here. She said that hay presses were important because it was fuel for the horses, and you don't really think of it like that. You can think of a hay press. I didn't really know what it was. She said, but it was a way to, compact the fuel. Not the fuel, but the food for the horse, so you can get work done. Is that also something that you came across too?
Oh yes, yeah. The idea is by pressing the hay, what you're doing is you're getting it ready for storage. So in other words, pressing the hay, it becomes a year-round edible thing for your animals, for your livestock. When you use the euphemism fuel for the horses, that's like equating gasoline for the cars.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I mean, but the horses are eating the hay to stay alive, just as you would do with the cows and that sort of thing. But by pressing the hay, you can sell it more easily. It's transportable more easily, and you can store it more easily to be used in the winter.
So it's for compacting it, for storage and transportation. Okay.
Yeah, as far as I know. Now, I'm no farmer, but maybe the person that you have towards the end of the thing could give you some better details on it. But it's very practical to have a hay press in an area, especially an area where people are trying to make money off what they're growing. In other words, you're going beyond subsistence level farming.
I have a question here from someone that says hay is usually baled. Is pressing the same thing as baling? Baling was more modern.
Yeah, it's the same result. If you bale hay, again, it's storage, transportable, that sort of thing. And when you're pressing the hay, it's the same thing, as far as I know.
And the other question is, where is the hay press now? Where in Dayton exactly is it?
I don't know if it's there. You mean, well, there is no operating hay press now.
Yeah, but the site, I think it is something that you can identify. I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
Wheeler and Thomas, it says, is at Dean Station. So that would be where the railroad station was.
Okay. Okay.
Okay? That was sold to S.I. Snedeker in 1875. So it was still going along right up to the early 1900s.
So is Hay Press Road is that right?
Well,
near-
Hay Press Road was associated with another Snedeker, Snedeker's on Hay Press Road. That was
Okay.
sold to the Reynolds brothers.
Okay.
Okay? Now, to give you an idea, the hay press outfit was putting out 6 tons of hay a day, pressing 6 tons of hay a day.
This one in Dayton or
The one in Dean Station.
the one in Dean Station? Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so that was a big deal, you know, and it's worth the questions that were asked. That's good.
Okay.
What is a hay press? Is it a machine? Sorry to be so ignorant. I've heard of it, but I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's a machine that gathers up the hay and spits it out in a bundle. You know, I guess it would be like looking like a brick, a huge giant brick. But again, I'm not an expert, so you'll have to wait and maybe ask the farmer at the end of our discussion here.
Yeah, if they dealt with hay, right?
Yeah. This could be a big issue, the hay press. Who knew? Okay, I'm finished with that part, Randy.
Okay, the next thing I have is
Can I
it's
ask
a
one question?
staple.
Are hay presses still used today to, bulk hay?
Are they still used?
Well, the farmer can get the equipment to do the pressing himself. You know, the big machinery, you see them out in the Midwest a lot. They go along, they do everything. The big agricultural outfits, you know, the big agri farms or whatever they're called, they have one machine on wheels that goes along and does everything. Cuts it down, packs it, presses it, the whole bit, and spits out a bale or spits out whatever you want to call it. And they put them on trucks and take them away.
Thank you.
Wagons, whatever.
Okay, the next thing I have is you were talking about staple crops like wheat, barley, and oats. So you want to
Okay,
talk
you want to do, well, what I have there is cash crops and staple crops.
Okay, yeah, I have wheat, barley, and oats. So those are
Okay, that's a good start. That'll keep you healthy.
okay.
The staple crop, obviously, when the farmers are starting, they're starting out for subsistence farming. You have to keep in mind that the farms were fairly large with acreage. You probably could get by being successful with a 400-acre farm. The largest farms in South Brunswick, the Lawrence farm was over 1,600 acres, and the Wetherill farm was probably about the same, maybe even a little larger. But the Wetherill farm did include part of Pigeon Swamp, which was only good for cutting down trees to use the wood and also for grazing in some of the less swampy areas. The Lawrence farm, they raised a lot of horses there. And if you could imagine, most of Monmouth Junction was taken up by one farm. That would be the Lawrence farm. Okay, so the staple crops, Randy mentioned a few: wheat, corn, your hay crops, including alfalfa, barley, oats, rye, and of course, corn. They had different time periods when they would sow the crops, and some were spring sown, some were fall sown. So basically, this was how it was when they started. Now, then you get into cash crops, and that spills over through the latter half of the 1800s to the 1900s. And what we would be aiming for would be this. The cash crops probably get to their peak in the 1920s. Then things go pretty bad in the Depression. So we're talking about from, let's say, 1850 to 1920. That's when the farmer in South Brunswick was king. This is what we were known as, a cash crop farming community.
Ed, someone has a question. They wanted to know how did the South Brunswick grain farmers compete with the Plains farmers? But I would think that was two different time periods. But what do
Oh,
you have?
yeah. In the 1700s, we don't have the Plains yet.
Right. Okay.
The Native Americans are handling that, and the buffalo are trampling any grain that's being grown. So that's not happening yet.
Different time.
You have to, the Midwest is not going to really open up for farming until after the Civil War. Okay, the visions that you have of the Kansas plains and Iowa and that sort of thing, it's not going to be until after the Civil War. And you got to wait till the railroads really open it up so that the farmers can get out there easily. And then the big farms, the big gigantic farms, don't come along till the middle of the 1900s, I'd say.
Okay.
All right, now can anybody tell me what was the king crop? What was the #1 crop in South Brunswick during this cash crop era?
Potatoes.
What is that?
Oats.
Not
Potatoes.
oats. Potatoes. Excellent. Now I'm going to give you more information on the potatoes of South Brunswick than you would care to know, because I think it's important that you walk away with great knowledge about South Brunswick potatoes. Over 9,000 acres of South Brunswick land was devoted to growing potatoes. I met a lot of farmers were involved in this cash crop. So they were growing them to sell them. Now this area also included Cranberry, Plainsboro, and Monroe. So I'm not slighting them. They're part of this whole potato thing. At one time, the potatoes from South Brunswick Township and Cranberry and Plainsboro and Monroe were called the best potatoes in the state. That was one of our bragging rights back before the Depression. Now, you may want to know what type of potatoes grew best in South Brunswick. I don't want to ask you if you know the names because this is really tough stuff. So I'll give them to you. First of all, there was the Irish cobbler potato. Then there is the Katahdin potato. You know that basically as your main potato. Then the Chippewa potato, named after the Native American tribe, the Chippewas. And the Green Mountain potato. So there were 4 famous potatoes that were grown in the ideal soil for growing potatoes in South Brunswick. And this is mainly on the intercoastal plain area of South Brunswick. The key shipper of potatoes was located in Monmouth Junction. That was Bennett and Clayton. The first potato harvest was late July, August. The second harvest was September, October. So they were getting 2 harvests out of this one crop. Give you an example of the quantity, and I could only get statistics on New Jersey. In 1900, 4 million bushels of potatoes were grown. And remember, the key area, we're included in that key area. In 1922, a little more than 20 years later, 16 million bushels of potatoes were grown. This is why we say that the king of the cash crops was the potato. Okay, now let me run down the list of other things that were grown that were turned into cash crops. Sweet potatoes, tomatoes, asparagus, cabbage, peppers, beans, eggplant, onions, peas, sweet corn, watermelons, cantaloupes, cauliflower. And I'm sure there's some more, but that's the list that I have.
I have a great picture here from the New Jersey State Archives. It's Mary Gulick of Monmouth Junction in 1940, and she's in a peach orchard. So it's a really great picture. So they must have been growing peaches here at some point too.
Yeah, well, that's the fruit section. That comes next.
That's next. Okay, good time.
But we're not done with the potato yet.
Okay.
I'm sure that you want to know the famous farmers of South Brunswick who grew potatoes. And I have a list in alphabetical order. So this will be easy to remember. The quiz will follow this presentation. We start with Mustafa Ahmed on Davidson Mill Road. T.M. Applegate on Dayton Jamesburg Road. Clarence Day on Davidson Mill Road. Ernest Duncan on Road Hall Road. Will Duncan on Docks Corner Road. Elmer Griggs, Dayton Jamesburg Road. Charles Holston, Sr. and Jr., also on the same road. Harry and Clarence Hunkley on the same road. Frank and John Kuhn, Dean's Road Hall Road. Arch Mershon, George's Road. The McDowell family on Stoltz Road. Charles Richter on George's Road. Warren Siegel, Dayton Jamesburg Road. Ed Vizinski on Highway 130. John Yaros on Dayton Monmouth Junction Road and Shawks Crossing Road. There's your Hall of Fame of the potato farmers in South Brunswick.
I didn't know about the potatoes until, we did this week. I didn't know that it was such a big thing in South Brunswick. So that was news to me.
Well, I go overboard with emphasis, but this is surely a good topic for a gathering of people, like for Memorial Day. This should be a topic of discussion. And I'm finished with the cash crops, Randy.
Okay. The next picture I have in the slide is Mary Gulick standing in the peach orchard, or I guess you would call it a peach orchard, right? I don't know.
Okay, so you're talking about the fruit.
Yeah, that's the picture I have up. Yep.
Okay. Now, the fruit was always there. John Wetherill was famous for his apples. And one of the big things that wealthy farmers did back in the 1700s was to graft apple shoots and so forth to come up with new types of apples. And he was famous for what he called, or what they call pippins. And of course, the apples were pressed, not just used to feed animals. And they got the cider out of that. And then probably the best alcoholic beverage was Jersey Lightning. And that was a form of apple whiskey or apple brandy. I'm not really up on it. I'm not a drinker.
Applejack. Yeah, it's Applejack. Yeah, you make a Jack Rose with it.
And another term for it was Jersey Lightning. But it's interesting that there were a few farmers in the 1700s that were well known for their apples. So we start with apples, and then that, of course, expands in the 1800s. Peaches, strawberries, raspberries, pears, and eventually these turn into cash crops, but not, of course, as big as the ones that I mentioned before, especially the potato.
And of course, we're going to talk about apples more later on when Jack talks about his memories of Orchardside. So we'll be talking about apples a little bit later too.
Right, and I have, as far as the fruit farmers are concerned, I have three well-known ones. That would be Headley in Dayton, Driggers on Stoltz Road, and Barkley on Day Road. Okay, we're ready for the next one, Randy, if you are.
Okay, the next thing we have are the dairy farmers, and I have pictures here of the dairy herd on Ralph Beekman Farm. These are from our archives here at the library. So in addition to the cows here from the 30s, it looks like the 30s, we have Queenie, who is a Beekman prize cow from the 30s. So these are the things I found in the archives. So she must have won some kind of prizes. I don't know what she won, but this is from the Beekman Dairy Farm.
I think they entered her in the Miss America pageant, but she got disqualified.
Yeah, maybe.
Because she couldn't fit into her bathing suit. I think that was one of the problems. Are we ready for the dairy?
Yep, we're ready.
Okay. When we start out in the 1700s, every farmer had at least one or two cows. Now that was for subsistence farming. And so it was very essential. If you had status as a farmer, you had to have at least one or two cows. If you were well off and a gentleman farmer and you had many acres, then you usually had more cows. Now, I don't have much information on it, but there were, as we move along in time, there were some well-known dairy farms. We have the Sweet Clover Farm, which was also called Ryan's Farm on Fresh Ponds Road. We have Sigel's Farm on South River Cranberry Road, Cook's Farm in Kingston, and Perine's Farm off Ridge Road in Monmouth Junction. These were the biggies as far as I could find in my research. And the milk from these farms was sold to dairies in Princeton, New Brunswick, and Jamesburg. So this was also a cash-making concern. Horse raising, not so much. There was probably more horse raising going on in the 1700s than in the 1800s and the 1900s. And as I mentioned, the chief one would be the Lawrence Farm, which provided stud service for people who wanted to increase their stock of horses or breed certain horses. That's what I have on dairy, Randy. Okay.
The next one we have is to be about the poultry and egg production. So I have this great picture of Mr. and Mrs. Fink of South Brunswick, and they got a loan from the State Board of Agriculture. And then also it'd be a good time for if Pat Romano is out on there to talk about Abe Dobin in that part too. So maybe you want to switch it up a little bit. If Pat wants to come on, are you out there, Pat?
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, well, I know that you had done some. You started to index the Abe Dobin book.
That was fun.
What's that?
That was a lot of fun. No.
It was fun. So we have, we can talk. I have a slide here of Abe Dobin, and if you could talk about, you had mentioned that he was part of the Jewish Agricultural Society, and
right.
He helped with all those things. So I have a picture of. Oh, you can see. You're not on the phone, so you can talk about Abe Dobin. That would be great.
Right. Well, the thing with Dobin was that his family. It wasn't just his immediate family who moved here when he was a young man or a child. Several of his family members came over to the United States, but apparently, according to his memoirs, he said that the families, his relatives weren't ready for how hard farming was going to be. And the more the research that I had done, I'm looking at several. Can't pronounce the name of the association. Kalal Links, jewishgen.org. A lot of Eastern European farmers couldn't own land. and over in Europe. So it was a whole new thing for them to be able to farm. So that be it said, the thing is, they recognized early on that these farmers, these Jewish farmers, needed some assistance, so they had the Jewish Agricultural Society. Dobin himself actually went to Rutgers. They said agricultural college at the time. I think they called it at that time, to learn how to farm. And in about the late 1920s, he joined the Jewish Agricultural Society. In fact, Dobin actually started in New York and moved out here later on. So he wasn't always in this location. And the thing is with the Jew, and again, more I'm reading, poultry farming didn't need as much land as actual crop farming, which was a bonus to begin with. And over a period of time, the Jewish Agricultural Society realized that poultry farming was more lucrative because of the amount of things that you could take from the poultry, because the amount of need for it. And World War II and those time periods actually developed a greater need for poultry and egg production. So it really was a bonus. There's a lot in South Brunswick specifically. A lot of the synagogues were involved with the farming community. They were almost interlinked, which again created a whole another layer of assistance for these new farmers who are just moving in. Jewish farmers themselves actually came in several waves in New Jersey to begin with. But again, Dobin decided to, he was actually almost like he's traveled all over the state to begin with. He didn't necessarily do only things in South Brunswick, but he was instrumental in getting poultry farmers settled in South Brunswick themselves. His particular farm wasn't a poultry farm when he was a young boy. I guess poultry farm became much later in a time period. But again, it became something that was again, they didn't need as much land. I guess the overhead wasn't as the same. Also, to the labor intensity of being able to keep your high holy days and keep your prayer life intact. Poultry farming was not as restrictive to what they could do. It made it easy. I guess because of the way the poultry farming works, as opposed to actual crop farming, it actually did not interfere with their prayer life. Because again,
that's interesting, because I always wondered what the connection was. I mean, why someone would come from Europe that traditionally weren't farmers and then go into chicken farming. So that's interesting because of the way they were able to still balance their religious life with it.
Yeah, actually, I didn't know about that until I started reading some of the other articles attached to Jewish farming in New Jersey. I didn't realize how much there was available about Jewish farming in New Jersey. And I think I sent you a couple articles mentioning Dobin presenting at several groups in South Brunswick themselves, again, connected with the local synagogues. They actually dropped Jewish Farmers Association, early on in some of the groups that Dobin was associated with, because I guess city people, apparently, again, I'm only reading from what I've seen, didn't really want to associate. It was kind of like they wanted to welcome everybody. So sometimes the feeling was, I believe, again, I'm only reading, I wasn't there, was that saying Farmers Association almost felt like it excluded everybody else. They want to keep the the prayer life alive. Again, and they started a lot of their synagogues in local areas, local community centers and things like that. And it wasn't until later on where they had their own buildings. But again, a very again, I'm only reading what I could find. But again, poultry farming, they didn't have need as much land. Again, poultry, it can go many different directions as far as what the products can be used for. And again, World War II, it boomed, absolutely boomed. Later on, however, in the 60s and so on, crops and products from the South kind of infringed upon the production. It was cheaper down South, the land was cheaper down South. So that kind of mostly squeezed out some of the poultry farmers up here.
Okay. Thanks for that, Pat. Some of the other slides I have up here, and also, did we mention that Dobin was the mayor for a while?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nope. Yeah, and a lot of other things too. He was incredibly. He was involved in a lot of politics, school boards, 4-H, you name it. Abe Dobin was in it. Different committees, township committees. He was on, I guess, what they were called the Juvenile Justice Committee, whatever they call it back then. And when kids got in trouble, he was on that committee too. So he was everywhere in the town.
He's an active guy. All right, thanks a lot, Pat. I guess the other slides I have here, these are great slides. These are great pictures I got from the state archives, but these are actually poultry farms in Monmouth Junction. This one's from 1948. So these are some really great photographs. And this guy's name is Elton Robbins. He's loading up it's a manure spreader on a conveyor belt. But these are great images I found. I just wanted to share them with everybody. I couldn't believe I found these. They're, South Brunswick specific. And this is Parker, yeah. And and by the way, since we're talking about the chickens, with this is the Backrack farm, and the South Brunswick Library is on this property right now. So right where the library is now was a chicken farm, and you can kind of tell, sort of, that this is Kingston Lane right here, and the land kind of slips down. So yeah, this is the library. This is a library property right now. That's the way it looked before it was built in the 40s. But okay. Now, Ed, did you have anything else to add about the chicken farmers?
Just some interesting tidbits, and I'll hurry up with this.
You're sharing your video now. You're in some. You in like the web browser?
You can't see the Backrack farm.
Are you talking to me, Randy?
I'm not sure. Someone said they're sharing it. I'm not. I thought somebody said that they had a video was up there. I'm not sure if there was somebody in the meeting or what's going on. But
yeah, that wasn't me.
No, I know it's someone else. I wasn't sure. But but go ahead though, because I think everything's okay. Everyone can see the Backrack farm slide up there right now.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, let me give you that list. These are the well-known egg farmers, chicken farmers in South Brunswick. Martin Bacharach, Kingston Lane, the Myers family on George's Road, Dimitri Ilnicki on Fresh Ponds, Andrew Hudak also on Fresh Ponds, Schultz family, and George Siegel on Davidson Mill Road, along with the Schultz family. We have to give equal time to the chickens who made up these poultry farms. You may not know the types of chickens that were prevalent in South Brunswick, but after this meeting you will know. There were 4. The Plymouth Rock, the Rhode Island Red, the Jersey Black Giant Wyandotte, and the White Leghorn. The last one was used only for hatching eggs. The other 3 for their meat as well as eggs. Then I have reasons for the decline and downfall, but I was going to save that till the end, Randy, because I also want to tie that in with the cash crops, the reasons why things sort of faded out.
Okay.
All right, so I'm finished with that. Pat did a great job, and if you're ready for the next section, so am I.
Yeah.
Oh.
The next
Okay,
thing I have up, what was that?
I was gonna add, I remembered that Dobin's family had Plymouth Rock chickens. Just one of those side things that you remember when you're indexing a book that's 515 pages long, but that's the kind of chickens he had,
Okay.
Plymouth Rock chickens.
Oh, and someone has another question. They want to know the last breed that you mentioned, Ed, is there were, it starts with the W. What was that one?
That was a very common one, the white leghorn.
White Leghorn. Okay.
The white leghorn, the way the farmers used that one was just to lay eggs.
Okay. Okay. The next thing I have up here is the Grange, because we wanted to talk about the Grange and how it's essential, part of life in rural America. But also the Pioneer Grange is the first Grange in New Jersey, and Norman Schwarzkopf, the founder of the state police, was a member here. So that's a good way to segue into the Grange.
Right. The reason that I bring up the Grange, and of course there's things attached to that as well. I mentioned the New Jersey Agricultural Museum with Wayman Kruger being very influential there. Of course, the Grange was behind that idea. Also involvement with the 4-H club for young future farmers, that type of thing. And of course, the Middlesex County Fair. And we have Al Habiak, who is big in organizing the Middlesex County Fair. So these are organizations that could still be going on, are going on, and the biggest one, of course, the Grange. The Grange gave a voice to farmers, and South Brunswick was big, as Randy mentioned, as being having one of the first Granges, and has a claim to fame. I believe this is in the 1870s. It gets started. So this is a post-Civil War movement. And the idea was to get farmers organized against big business and people who were trying to undermine them as far as getting their money's worth for their crops and so forth, and putting them at a disadvantage. The things that they strive for right from the beginning were better farm prices, better living conditions, fighting the exploitation of farmers, improving farm markets, lobbying for rural electrification, lobbying for rural free delivery of the mail. That's where the RFD on mail comes from. And setting up a Grange League, which would be a federation of farmers cooperatives, and also getting involved in politics and becoming a force in big political elections. The Pioneer Grange on Ridge Road, the building still standing there, began in December 28, 1871, and is considered the oldest in the state. Now, they met before that in Jamesburg and in Cranberry, and they met in a store in Dayton before they got into the Pioneer Grange building. They celebrated their anniversaries, golden anniversary and their 75th anniversary, and their 100th anniversary was celebrated in 1972. It's interesting to see the number of people who attended, because After the 75th anniversary, the attendance dropped. And the Grange, people go by the building and they don't pay much attention to it, know what it's there for, and so forth. But at one time, it was a very important fixture in South Brunswick and needs to be mentioned. Okay, Randy, I'm finished with that, other than if anybody's interested in why the cash crops started dying out and why the poultry farmers started dying out.
Okay, well, I just have a couple slides here that I also found at the State Archives. These are exhibits from the 40s. They were this is the Pioneer Grange, and they won some sort of a prize. This is during the war. It's Foods for Defense. And these are pretty interesting shots I found. And these are from this Pioneer Grange #1. So they're specific to right here to South Brunswick. So interesting slides there. What was the next part that you wanted to talk about after the Grange now?
I just wanted to wrap it up with why the farms faded away and are still fading away. I mean, we still have farms in South Brunswick. Von Thunes comes to mind, of course, with their corn maze and so forth. But it's sort of a dying breed. And, you know, when I started with that quote by Ilnicki about warehouses growing well in South Brunswick, that seems to be the cash crop now, warehouses.
Right, right.
I just wanted to wrap it up with why the crops died out. So is anybody interested in that?
Sure.
Okay. With the cash crops, a phenomenon that was happening as the years went by, we're talking about the later 1900s now, soybeans became a big deal. Also, sod farms. Then, of course, housing. Kendall Park is an example of that. And shopping centers. And then, of course, the warehouses. So you see there was a progression of expansion of things that eventually led to not about farming, but about convenience for either business or population or whatever the case may be. So South Brunswick makes a transition from a farming community to a bedroom community for commuters. And that basically is our status now.
Yeah,
Now
that's it. Oh, go ahead, Ed, sorry.
Okay, now as far as the poultry egg production is concerned, the Depression really, they survived it. And I guess the golden era is after the Depression, recovering and so forth. But in the 1960s, they ran into some problems. And I have a list of things. Overproduction was a problem. And then, of course, then the egg prices dropped. The feed costs were rising. The labor costs were increasing. The machinery costs were going through the roof. That had to do with automatic feeders and pickup machines. Building material costs were increasing. Heat and drought were a problem, and diseases such as Newcastle virus, because chickens are very sensitive to certain diseases, and that can wipe out quite a few of them. So there were several reasons why the poultry industry in South Brunswick sort of faded. And that concludes the research that I have, Randy.
Okay, it's a good segue. I just want to show a few pictures that I found in the archives of South Brunswick farmers. This is a great shot of Willis Griffin. He was the 1994 Farmer of the Year at the Middlesex County Fair. And these photos I kind of found, they were negatives, and I had them, I digitized them. They really came out to be great pictures. So I have a couple great ones of him. I have more, but I picked these out. I thought they were so good. And this is the man you had mentioned earlier, Clarence Day, in a soybean field in 1984. So we've got some gems there in the photography collection. But that's what brings us up to, I call it Latter-day South Brunswick Farms. And I have an aerial photo of I guess the Sigel Farm, 1960 on 192 Ridge Road. This is Pleasant Hill Farm, and it recently closed. And Vicky came in and had mentioned that it was closing, and so I started to look into the background of it. So yeah, this farm was it's two families. The Griggs had married into the Sigel family, but it was the Pleasant Hill Farm, and it looks like it just closed. Now, Vicky, you're out there. You were the one that was telling me you had such fond memories of it when they brought apples to the kids during when they were in elementary school.
Yes, Dolores would, for field day at Indian Fields, she would come with bushels and bushels of apples for all the kids to have as their snack during field day. They were always very, very generous, the family. And the farm, I've been here for 30 years, and for 30 years, it was pick your own apples before Tahun's, not Tahun's, Von Thun's had an apple orchard. So at Pleasant Hill, they had their own blend. It was called Molly Brights, and you could only get it at their farm. And it was during a certain time. It was a Macintosh with another blend, but they also had a peach orchards there too. And they're all plowed down. I feel terrible.
Yeah.
Shame.
How soon was it?
I don't
how
know if the
long ago was it
pandemic did it, but,
open?
but
it
it
was
got
open last year? Was it open last year? How recently did
You're
it close?
breaking up, Randy.
I'm sorry. How recently did it close?
I don't think it was open last summer, but it
Okay.
definitely was open the summer before.
Okay.
I bought stuff at the farm stand.
Okay.
And it sprouted a warehouse if you go by there now.
Yeah. The new crop. All right. Thanks, Vicky. The other thing now this brings us to Von Thunes, and everybody knows about Von Thunes. I have some pictures of Robert Von Thune. He was an outstanding young farmer back in 2001. Wow, that's already 20 years ago. But these are some pictures that we had in the archives. And another thing I wanted to mention about Von Thunes was in 2007, Bobby Flay was there to do a program for CBS on grilling corn. So yeah, Von Thunes is still around. And then that brings us to the next part, Orchardside and Barclays. And now Jack Barclay was going to talk about some of his memories from the farm from the 60s and 70s. So if you wanted to talk about that now, Jack, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, I recently wrote up my memories of Orchardside Farms. It's in two parts. That one part describes the farm itself and the farming operations. When I started working on the farm as a kid back in the 60s and up through the 70s and early 80s. And the second part is a little more personal about life on the farm and things that we did as kids. So I'm going to describe the farm and just mention some subjects. And then when I'm done with that, maybe you all could ask if I would elaborate on certain topics. Because these memories I wrote up are quite lengthy, and I'm sure you don't want to listen to everything we did as kids. So think about that. Think about questions that you might want to ask. So my father, John H. Barclay, I share the same name as him, was born on our farm along Dye Road in Cranberry, or South Brunswick Township, but our mailing address was always Cranberry. His parents died when he was in high school. He dropped out of high school and took over running the farm in the 1920s. Now, he told me it was a more diverse subsistence type farm when he was a kid, but he eventually transitioned into growing apples only. And my earliest memories are when it was a wholesale apple business. We called it Orchardside Farms because he grew apples on 5 different properties: the home farm along Dye Road, another parcel on Iker Road, a parcel in Dayton, another piece of land along South River Road, and then a small parcel in Heightstown. So we had 5 separate properties, but they didn't have any buildings. They only had orchards. And the total land area then was about 360 acres. The home farm was about 180 acres. So we grew about a dozen varieties of apples, ranging from the first green apples that were called Star, Starr, very bitter green apple that I always wanted to eat because I wanted to be able to eat a fresh apple, but they're so sour as to be just about inedible. A couple other varieties of green apples, and then up through all the red varieties of apples, Macintosh, Golden Delicious, and the last varieties, Rome Beauties and Stamen Winesap were some of the latest harvested apples. I remember that we harvested about 75,000 bushels of apples a year. It varied a little bit, but that's a figure that sticks in my mind. We had 3 cold storages on the home farm there, and each one held about 25,000 bushels. Now, these were cold storages, simply cold to begin with, but during my time, my father transitioned 2 of those cold storages into controlled atmosphere, which were cold storages that were cold, but they had machinery that reduced the oxygen level and raised the CO2 level to retard spoilage. It was a big technological leap because it preserved freshness in the apples, so they would be fresher well into the wintertime. So we packed all of our apples on site in a large packing house. And we sold all the apples back then wholesale through a cooperative association called the Jersey Fruit Cooperative Association. They basically would place an order with us for, say, 100 boxes of Red Delicious or something. And then we would pack them and ship them out within 2 or 3 days. So during my time as a kid working on the farm, we transitioned largely because of my oldest brother, Ted. He graduated from college and started working on the farm full time. He and my father decided to expand the business to include peaches, a few pears, and a few nectarines. Up until that time, it was all apples and all wholesale. But he wanted to include a retail part of the business, which was much better served the customer, particularly with the peaches and the nectarines, because you can provide tree ripened fruit, where in the wholesale business, you have to pick the peaches and nectarines when they're harder, and it's just not a very good product. Whereas if you allow them to tree ripen and handle them carefully, you can give the customer a much better product by selling directly to them. So they started off one fall by just setting up several apple crates over on South River Road and providing small lots of small baskets of apples to people that would just drive up and buy small quantities. That business proved to be very lucrative. So within, it was 2 or 3 years, they built a fruit stand on the Madden farm along South River Road. And we transitioned into a retail business that eventually grew to include some other farm products that we bought, like corn and tomatoes. Well, we grew tomatoes one year, but corn, tomatoes, and some other some other products, fruit products that we figured people would like. So the business really transitioned then, that was in the early 70s, from wholesale only to wholesale and retail. Now, during that time with the fruit stand, we still grew a lot of apples and sold them wholesale through the co-op association. But the retail business became more and more important, especially with the peaches, the pears, and the nectarines.
Jack, I have a question from someone. They're asking, how many years does it take to get a good apple harvest?
Oh, well, I would reply, well, what do you mean by good?
Profitable?
Oh, you can start picking apples in maybe 6 to 8 years, but the trees aren't going to, it depends on the kind of tree you grow. There's dwarf varieties now that produce quicker in fewer years, but they really don't start producing until 10 to 15 years.
Wow, that's quite
We had a
number.
lot of trees, that were 30 to 40 years old, which is really getting into their lifespan. But we had a lot of very large old apple trees that were, 20 feet tall and 1.5 feet in diameter.
Wow.
So
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm just looking, do you have another question?
Well, yeah, I was just about apples, but you mentioned peaches before, and I didn't know about how irritating the peach fuzz could be, and I found that to be fascinating, that peach fuzz can cause that much of a problem when you're picking them.
Yeah, most of you know that peaches sometimes have a fuzz on them, on the skin. Especially white-fleshed peaches are particularly fuzzy. And for some people, it's a terrible irritant. Our pickers would often pick in the summer, in July and August when it was really hot, with long sleeves, just to avoid getting that peach fuzz on their arms. It's a real irritant to some people. I mean, different people react to it differently, but it's miserable. I never picked peaches. I wasn't quite skilled enough as a little kid to do that. But that's okay. I had plenty of other work to do. But yeah, peach fuzz can be terribly irritating. They started producing varieties that produced less fuzz in later years. So you don't see it as much, but particularly some of the white fleshed varieties of peaches are really fuzzy. And you don't see it. Another reason you don't see it is when peaches are harvested, at least if they're harvested properly, they're picked and hydrocooled. And that means dipping them in cold water in baskets or bins to remove the heat inside the pit and the flesh. And the process of hydrocooling will remove a lot of that fuzz, but the fuzz is not removed for the poor people picking them. So you don't see it that much in store-bought peaches because a lot of it gets removed by that washing process.
So the idea of hydrocooling, you were saying the heat has to be taken out of the fruit and in the pit, but if it doesn't, that means that it just doesn't cool down properly and has more of a chance to spoil. Is that why you put it in the water? Okay.
Yeah, if you have a big basket of peaches and you put it in a cold storage, it's going to take a long time for the heat to dissipate from the peaches in the center of that basket. In fact, we used to pick peaches in only half baskets because we wanted them to cool down so quickly to retard spoilage. And it's a totally different procedure than apples. You don't worry about that with apples because you generally pick them when it's cooler out. You pick peaches, nectarines in the summer when it's really hot, and they have a higher moisture content in their flesh, and they will spoil more rapidly. So hydrocooling is a really important operation, and it was a thing that we had to add when we started growing peaches and nectarines.
Okay. That explains it.
I'm just looking through some notes here. So in the, starting in the 70s there, we had, as I mentioned when I left off, we still sold a lot of apples wholesale, and we started selling retail in our own market there. We occasionally had small lots of fruit, odd lots of, 50 or 100 boxes of this or that we didn't sell wholesale or retail. And we sold these at the Heightstown Farm Auction. I'm not sure that's the official name. It may have been the Heightstown Produce Auction or something, but it was an auction over on the south side of Heightstown. And I was usually given the job of taking a pickup load of fruit over to the auction market. And it was a true auction. You got in line, you had a sample box or basket of what you wanted to sell, and you would drive up and you would put it out in the pit that was surrounded by people, usually people that operated roadside fruit stands, who wanted to buy small quantities of fruit to sell in their stands. And there was an auctioneer there who barked out the prices. You would usually set a minimum price, and if it wasn't met, then you went home with the fruit or whatever you were selling. The Heightstown Farm Auction was a fascinating cultural and societal phenomenon. It was a social gathering place of the local farming community, both the sellers, the farmers, and the buyers who usually ran fruit stands. It was a very fast-paced operation. It would only take a couple of minutes to have your lot of fruit put up for auction, and then you would accept or reject, and then you would move on and unload the fruit in a truck or into the truck of the buyer. I spent a lot of time at the Heightstown Farm Auction and saw people selling all manner of things that I never thought people would bother to sell. Bundles of dill and other weird herbs and root crops that I hardly ever knew existed. It was a fascinating and memorable experience to go through the fruit auction. So back at the farm operations here, we had a workforce that included my father, my oldest brother, Ted. We had two foremen, Harold Tilton and Ed Conover. Harold oversaw the apple growing and picking operations, and Ed Conover oversaw the peaches and nectarines. We had an annual workforce of about 15 full-time employees. They lived on the farm full-time. And then we had a seasonal workforce that would come in during the picking season that was maybe another 15 to 20 workers. So during the fall harvest, it was up around 30 to 35 workers. Of the full-time workers that lived there, they did various jobs in the orchards and worked on the machinery. And then their wives worked in the packing house, packing apples. Just very briefly, we sold apples basically in three different ways. One is a box called a tray pack. It holds just about a bushel, where individual apples are put into little cups in a big tray that holds maybe 15 to 20, depending on the size. And we also sold apples in 3 and 4 pound bags. And then a box of those held 12 3 or 4 pound bags. So we sold tray packs and bagged apples in 3 or 4 pound weights. So that's the basics of the farm, but I invite you to ask any questions. I have written a lot more than I just mentioned, but I just wanted to summarize the basic farm operation. Then the second half of these memories that I wrote about are things that we did on the farm as kids, both work and non-work related. I had two brothers, my oldest brother, Ted, and the middle brother, Barry. Barry was 4 years older than I. Ted was 7 years older. One of my sections here is called the worst job ever. So the worst job ever on the farm was putting down black plastic around young apple trees. So this black plastic came in big rolls, 20-foot wide sheets. And we would go out and put this black plastic down around the younger apple trees to retain moisture in the soil and retard weeds. So we would cut a big square of this, like 20 feet on a side, and dig a shallow trench with a grub hoe or a Maddox. It was really difficult, hard, dusty, dirty work digging those trenches. My brothers usually did the trench digging because they were bigger and stronger, and I would go back and fill in the soil over the edge of the black plastic that we put down in the little trench. The worst part about this was we were constantly bitten by greenhead flies. Any of you that have worked out in the outdoors in the summertime in New Jersey know about greenhead flies. They don't sting, but they bite and they really hurt. And these greenhead flies made this job that was physically really demanding, just really miserable. We were dusty, dirty, sweaty, and then you're getting bitten by greenhead flies and deerhead flies. I would pray that my father would come up with some other job for me to do other than putting down black plastic. It was just dreadful work. So as kids on the farm, we got into various kinds of activities involving cars, model rockets. I built a rocket sled one summer, and various other shenanigans that kids are likely to get into. Another one of our jobs, and this was given to us because we were unskilled kids. So apple trees will develop suckers, which are long, single branched stems that grow from the main trunk of an apple tree. And usually you want to remove them because they drain the tree of moisture and nutrients and whatnot. So, and it's a very unskilled job to go out and prune suckers. So these suckers they grow up to about the diameter of your thumb, and they can grow up to 6 or 8 feet long. And we did this during the summer when the apples were just developing. They were about the size of a quarter or a 50-cent piece. Somewhere we learned that if you take one of these suckers, which is really whippy like a fishing rod, and you sharpen the end of it, and you stick a small apple onto it, you can fling that apple like 150 yards. We called this apple flinging. It was one of our summer pastimes. So while we were out and we were supposed to be pruning suckers, which we did, but we got distracted by flinging apples at passing cars and neighbors. And
Sounds
we
like
even
fun.
had little battles with one of our neighbors by flinging apples at their house, and they would come out and fling apples at us. It was great, simple fun for 12-year-old kids. So I spent a lot of time hunting and fishing on the property. I'm just going through my notes here. So my brothers and I were interested in cars. I started driving tractors as far back as my memory goes. So we eventually built a coaster kart, which is like a soapbox derby racer. But there isn't much elevation change on Orchard Side, only back from the main farm going down towards Devil's Brook. So we used to drive this coaster down that hill. We soon tired of that, and my father bought us a go-kart. That was a huge amount of fun, much to the dismay of all the workers around the farm, because we would drive the go-kart around the farm buildings. To get us away from the farm buildings, my father scraped us out a little oval dirt track. So we raced the go-kart around the dirt track. One of the things that kids do is they always want to get things bigger and faster and better. So we outgrew the go-kart and eventually got a hold of a Volkswagen Beetle that Harold Tilton, the foreman, used to own. We took the fenders off of it, knocked out the front glass, put wire screen in, put big tires on it, and we raced it on our oval dirt track back on the other side of the brook. That soon, well, we soon got bored with just one car. So then Barry and I bought another car, and I scraped out a bigger 1 mile race course in the back field. So the two of us could race one another. It was a huge amount of fun, having your own car and your own racetrack. Another thing we did was we had plenty of space there, and we were into model rocketry. So this is back in the era of the space race, and there was a lot of exposure about rockets and satellites and space travel on the news, and this fascinated us. So we got into model rocketry, first by filling little CO2 cartridges with match heads and igniting them. One of the more memorable experiences, in fact, it was one of the last, was we fired off one of these little makeshift rockets, and it went about 10 feet in the air, turned 90 degrees, and went screaming and crashed into the shroud on top of 2 propane tanks on one of the workers' houses. We looked at each other and said, well, we probably shouldn't be doing this anymore because we might blow up these propane tanks. Anyway, we had a huge amount of fun with model rocketry on the farm, mainly because we had all this space. So another landmark thing about Orchard Side, I'll end with this, and then you can ask some questions, is we used to have this huge tree in the front yard. It was a Norway spruce. Everybody called it the pine tree, but it was actually a Norway spruce that was about 150 feet tall. It was kind of a landmark that you could see from Dye Road. And my father told me that before my time, he had built a star arrangement of Christmas lights on a piece of plywood and had it put in the top of the tree. And he would light it during, or electrify it during Christmas season. And you could see this from, well, I remember seeing it one year coming out of Cranberry, which is 3 miles away, but it was prominent. It was up there like 150 feet tall. So during my time, the top of that tree blew out. And when my father told me this story, I pleaded with him to let's put up this Christmas star again. And it sounds easy, but putting a piece of plywood up in the top of a 100 foot tall Norway spruce is no easy task. But anyway, we got one of the farm workers to eventually put the Christmas star back up on top of the tree, and we would light it during Christmas time. And you could see it, like I said, from over a mile away along Dye Road. I was extremely proud of that Christmas star whenever I would come home for Christmas holidays and light it up for everybody to see. So I'll end on kind of a sad note. So in July 1977, during evening hours, a fire broke out in the packing house on our farm. I never learned exactly how or where it started, other than I was told it was an electrical short in the packing house, which was no surprise because the packing house was a very old structure with a lot of makeshift wiring that had been done over the years, and I could easily see something shorting out. Anyway, the fire started, and we had so many wooden boxes of empty wooden apple boxes stored in two adjacent pole barns that once this fire got going, there was no containing it because of all the wood that there was stored there to burn. Cranberry Fire Department responded quickly, but as soon as they got there, the fire was really out of control. They did a heroic job of saving the shop, but all the buildings burned. The packing house, the 3 cold storages, all the labor housing, everything burned. Now, my brother and father rebuilt quickly with a steel building as a packing house, and they got machinery. It was quite the accomplishment in July to get all the machinery and all the other equipment ready to harvest peaches and apples that fall, but they did it. But from my perspective, the fire was really the end of the Orchardside Farms as I knew it growing up. It changed the whole operation, and it really wasn't ever the same after that. So on that, I will take any questions, welcome any questions you have about the farm or things that we did on the farm as kids. A lot of the fun stuff.
Okay. I have
Well-
a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question about the co-ops. I'm wondering how that works. If you say an order comes in for 100 bushels, how is it decided whose apples are used to fill that? How does the whole thing work?
Well, someone from Jersey Fruit would call us directly and order 100 boxes of Red Delicious or 150 boxes of
Right.
Stamens. So they made the decision of which farm to call
Okay,
at Jersey Fruit.
okay. Is that still in operation? The co-op?
Not to my knowledge, but it could be in some other form, but I doubt it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So Randy, don't you have any questions?
Yes, I do. I was if you could elaborate on the part about how your father pulled you on the sled in the snow one winter and how you went down Day Road, because that part, you can't imagine doing that today. And I thought that was an interesting little story. So if you can elaborate on that one, that'd be great.
Yeah, so Randy read this in my memories. One year back in it'd have to be in the early 60s, we had 2 heavy snowfalls. And I say 2 because it was important. We had the first one and it settled and the roads were covered by compacted snow. They plowed, but when they plow, there's still a couple of inches of snow, or often a couple inches of snow compacted on the road. Then we had another snowfall. And I talked my father into pulling us behind the station wagon on sleds and saucers. And we first did this on our lane. There's a 800-foot lane running from Dye Road to our house. And that wasn't enough for me. So I said, well, let's go out on the roads. Schools were closed. There was virtually no traffic on the roads because of these two snowfalls, but the roads were in perfect condition with packed snow and then fresh snow on top of it. And my father dragged us all the way to Plainsboro, which is like 3 miles behind the station wagon. And we turned around and came back. We went back over Route 130 and drove down or drove north on South River Road. It was a memorable experience, just being pulled behind a station wagon on a friend of mine was with us and he had a saucer, I had a sled. It was a huge amount of wintertime fun that's unimaginable nowadays with the amount of traffic. Like I said, there was so much snow that there was virtually nobody on the roads, but the roads were in perfect condition with the two snowfalls.
I don't even like going on 130 now in a car, so I couldn't imagine going on a sled. So it's not my favorite road.
Back to the farm operations, when we had these off-site farms, particularly in Heightstown and on South River Road, we had to drive farm machinery, particularly to the Heightstown farm. And that includes sprayers, pumper trucks that carry the water for the sprayer, then a tractor and a big flatbed trailer to bring back boxes of apples. And we had to drive those through Heightstown to get to the Heightstown orchard, including going across the intersection there by the Sunoco station where you come out of Cranberry and go into Heightstown. Yeah, that's unimaginable nowadays.
Yeah, I like that.
I have another question. You had said at the beginning that your father had to take over the farm after his parents died in 1920 or thereabouts. Was that
Yeah.
because of the Spanish flu?
I don't know that. I've wondered that, but he never told me what they died of. I just know that he dropped out of high school because both his parents died. It could well have been,
Yeah.
but I never knew enough about pandemics back then to ask him. So I don't really know.
Yeah, we were just curious about that. Thank you.
Yeah, Randy,
Yeah.
this is Ed. I wanted to ask a question. I'm curious. I know at one time in the men's South Brunswick softball league, Orchardside Farms sponsored a team. And I wondered if anybody in the family played for that team. I played for that team for several years, and Al Habiak was the coach of the team. Did
No.
anybody on the Orchardside Farms family play for the team?
No, I played in Little League in Orchardside. We didn't sponsor a team, but we had one of those signs on the outfield fence. But no, we didn't play in the softball league.
Okay, yeah, those were good years. I remember designing the shirt for it, and we had a big red apple on the shirt. I don't know if you guys ever got one of those shirts, but it looked pretty good. I thought I did a good job on it, but I just wanted to pass that along to you.
So what years was that?
That was back in the 70s, and must have been in the early 70s. And I know we went, it must have been at least 3 or 4 years. And we did very well. We took first place a couple of times.
All right.
So we got Orchardside Farms on the map, the local map.
So was the team called the Apples?
We had a very good team. But I just don't remember anybody in your family being on the team, and I was curious about that.
I don't remember anybody in the family being on the team.
Okay.
I would have
But
been
you
too
remember Al
young.
Hay, you remember Al Habiak, right?
I remember the name.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's big with the Middlesex County Fair now. I think he's president of that association.
Okay.
And his tree farm is still going strong.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's right off the turnpike there.
Uh-huh.
And another question I had was, in several, not several, but some farmers had family burial plots. I guess your family didn't have a family burial plot, on the farm. Were members of your family buried in a cemetery?
Yes, we have a family burial plot in Heightstown.
Oh, okay. On the farmland?
No,
In a regular
there.
cemetery?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just curious because that's also a thing that's dying out too. Having trouble preserving these. The Probasco Cemetery, we just discovered a McDowell gravestone.
Huh.
And Herman Trucking owns the property where the stone was discovered. And we have that in a warehouse. Randy and I have plans for those. And the stones we have are all farmers who passed away and were buried on family plots. But as I say, that thing is sort of vanishing too.
Yeah, I think there are regulations that if they don't prohibit it, they certainly discourage it from.
Oh yeah, nowadays, yeah.
Yeah.
But back in the day, that's what farmers would do and have
Yeah.
their own burial plot. But with the progress, I'll put that in quotation marks. They're being forgotten, just like the farmers are being forgotten, unfortunately.
Well, that's why I took the time to write down some of my memories. I really skipped over that because I could talk for 2 hours about everything that I've written about. But
Well, we'll get you back next year.
one other thing I'll mention about the farm that I meant to, that you might find interesting. So when I started working on the farm as a kid, we handled all the apples in 1 bushel wooden boxes. So those boxes require a lot of hand labor to both put out in the orchard, fill with apples, pick up and put on a trailer, put in the cold storage, take out of the cold storage and put in the packing house. And during my time on the farm, we transitioned away from those small volume boxes to what we called bulk bins, which are wooden bins. They were wood back then, now they're plastic, that hold about 20 bushels, and they can be moved around with forklifts. So all of that transition eliminated a lot of hand labor, like a lot of things in industrial and agricultural society. There's been a lot of innovations to reduce a lot of hand labor. And that was an innovation that we adopted that was a big change in the farm there because we had thousands of these 1 bushel wooden boxes that we had to store and of course put out in the orchards to fill and then bring back. And the transition to the bulk bins was a big change in how we handled all the fruit. I meant to mention that, so there you go.
Thank you.
Steve, are you still there?
No, Randy's in charge.
No,
I know. My
Steve
nephew
Barclay.
Steve was online, and I was asking if he was still online.
I'm still here.
Oh, you have any questions?
No, no, I'm looking.
Oh, come on, Steve.
Steve, I have a question for you. I mean,
Sure.
not that you were farming apples back in the day, but how the labor intensive, how much differences with labor would you consider between like growing fruit and as opposed to Christmas trees, what you do now? It would seem to me that the former would be a lot more labor intensive. What's your opinion?
Yeah, growing up, I wasn't involved in the apple operations very much. I was just a child, and maybe in high school or middle school they had pretty much fully dissolved. But I do have a lot of experience growing Christmas trees, and they're much less labor intensive.
That's it, I guess.
Just to pick hundreds of apples off of a tree that could be anywhere from a few feet off the ground to 10 feet in the air, and just acres upon acres of those trees. You can just imagine, and the weight of them alone. A Christmas tree isn't that heavy compared to boxes of apples. You've ever picked up a 5 or 10 pound bag at the grocery store, or gone apple picking with your family and brought home 40 pounds of apples accidentally.
Right.
The one thing that was different about the apples was the ladders. Most people don't think about it, but we had dozens and dozens of these big wooden ladders to get up to the tops of the largest trees. And those ladders are big and heavy, and there's no way me as a kid could pick apples because it was just too physically demanding to lug those ladders around. It's easy to pick an apple, when you can reach up at head height, but you go up in the top of a 15 or 20 foot tall apple tree with a 20 foot tall ladder. It's a challenging occupation.
Yeah, it sounds it.
It's one of the reasons why there's been a shift towards dwarf trees to minimize that the picking of those high-placed apples in large trees.
I have a question from someone. They were wondering about pesticides. These were pesticides used on the apples and other fruits that were grown.
Absolutely.
And so I figured.
So with any monoculture like an apple orchard, you're going to have pest problems. And this was an era back when there were much fewer or almost non-existent regulations against various pesticides. I remember my father just telling me, stay away from that part of the building where we store these pesticides. Just don't go there. We used some nasty stuff, arsenic in particular. Now that changed. I wrote about this in my document. Ernie Christ was the agricultural extension agent out of Cook College at Rutgers. And he often came to our orchard. Oh, that reminds me to mention about the Russians. He came to our orchard probably every other week, and he introduced my father to a more benign form of pest management that was called integrated pest management. Basically, when you use these non-selective, highly toxic pesticides, it kills almost all the insect life, including the predators and the prey. Integrated pest management is a more controlled approach that's more selective towards certain pests and not so broad spectrum. The idea was to try to maintain lower levels of your primary pests and levels of their predators to help control the populations rather than wiping everything out and having a vacuum and then having this influx of pests that you then have to spray and eradicate for. So during my time, there was quite a change, both in the application and the types of pesticides and in the regulations. It was driven by both things. The integrated pest management approach worked, plus there were more restrictions placed on some of these highly toxic broad spectrum pesticides. So there was a shift towards let's say, a little more ecologically friendly way of pest management. Oh, the Russians. So one year, Ernie Christ brought a group of, I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 or 6 farmers from the then Soviet Union to tour several farms in New Jersey. And one of the farms that they visited was our farm. I got the sense that Ernie Christ was very proud of Orchardside Farms and he wanted to show it off. I remember being impressed by this group of, as a kid, 12-year-old kid, seeing 6 Russians is like people landing from the moon. I mean, it's very foreign to me. And I was impressed by this. They were impressed by 2 things. One, how Orchardside was a family farm with, our house right there in the middle of the farm, as opposed to the state-run farms that they were used to that were more industrial in nature. And also that we had 3 cold storages on our farm. That was surprising to them that we were that advanced that we had our own cold storages. Back to you.
One of the questions before was, did you know if DDT was used? I mean, that's more for when you spray it. It's just in general. You don't put that on crops, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't remember that we ever used DDT. Now, my father may have used it back in the early 50s, but it's more used in forest pest management and cotton and
Okay.
to my knowledge, it was not widely used on apple crops, at least in New Jersey. I wasn't aware that we ever used it.
Okay.
But we used stuff that was nastier than DDT.
Oh, okay. It's even worse, huh?
Well, from what my father told me, yeah. Yeah, there were some powerful pesticides that I came away as a kid like, just don't go anywhere near this stuff.
Hey, Jack,
Yeah.
I got a question. My mom actually grew up in South Brunswick on a farm, and apparently the rent was $13 a month for the entire farm back in the 30s. She was telling me stories that her family couldn't afford pesticides, so they picked the bugs off of the plants and put them into things of kerosene, which is kind of disgusting. But is that something you ever did yourself? Or
No, we had hundreds of acres of trees, thousands of trees. We sprayed with, it was a sprayer that was pulled behind a tractor.
Right.
And it had its own little diesel engine and a big fan. And it basically pumped the liquid spray out nozzles that ran around the circumference of the sprayer. And then the big fan in the back sucked air in and blew it out over the nozzles.
Oh, gosh.
So it vaporized it in order to saturate or cover the leaves. No, pest control was done with big sprayers pulled behind tractors.
Lucky you guys. I don't know if I want to pick bugs off of plants.
Well, the bugs that we were dealing with, some of them you couldn't see unless you had a magnifying lens. Particularly spider mites. They're so small you can't see them.
So they would discolor the leaves, maybe?
Yeah, you read about that. Mites suck liquid out of the leaves, and it affects the chlorophyll content in the leaf, and the leaf doesn't appear as bright green as it should if it's healthy. Now, that's probably not a very good explanation, but anyway, spider mites are tiny. You can't hardly see them except with a hand lens. but you get millions of them on a tree, and they're basically sucking the blood out of the tree.
Oh, right.
So it damages photosynthesis and just makes the tree unhealthy, and it will take on a slightly bronzy look. My father would always be able to recognize it. It took me a while, but he could tell if there were mites on a tree without picking a leaf and looking underneath it and looking for mites. Any other questions? Did Steve have a question?
Well, Steve wrote something in. He says, your father welcomed the Russians with a special drink, chilled Applejack, sweetened and served in a hollowed out apple. Is that a story, that a family story?
Now that he mentions it, I seem to remember something about that.
Yeah, it was, we've got a newspaper clipping of it.
Oh,
That-
Oh,
I forget the name of the drink, but it made the paper, and they, John Barkley welcomes Russian dignitaries to New Jersey Apple Farm with whatever it was called, the
oh,
drink was.
well, I got to read that because I wrote about that just from my memory. And I didn't have any written record of it, but you apparently do, right?
Steve, if you can scan a copy of that and send it to me, that would be great.
Absolutely. We'll take a look.
So where did you find that, Steve, or did your mom find it?
That was all Mom. She found it. So
Uh-huh.
we
Weren't there
we've
supposed to be Russians come to visit South Brunswick at one time, and they just drove through, or one of their dignitaries? It's supposed to be a really big deal. Somebody had a picnic in their backyard or something along that. I'm thinking way back in one of our meetings. About
Randy,
or whoever.
Yeah.
Khrushchev.
Randy?
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the 60s, there was a guy, I forget the name, I have the notes on it. He was supposed to host Nikita Khrushchev,
Okay.
and it fell through. But it made the newspaper that, the Khrushchev was coming to Kendall Park, and he was going to participate in a barbecue in the guy's backyard. But it turned out that they didn't have time, in rushing to the UN or away from the UN going to DC. I don't know what the deal was, but they couldn't stop in Kendall Park, so the whole thing fell through.
Mhm.
They should have served him Applejack.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank Jack and everyone else, and Steve and Pat and Ed for coming out tonight and making this meeting work. So I think it was a really good meeting, and learned a lot. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So we'll stay tuned. So next month we might try to do an outdoor meeting. I'm not sure the details yet, but that way we could sit out and be in person. So that's a possibility.
Okay. Okay.
But thanks for coming out, everybody, and thank you, Jack.
Yeah. I'm just looking through the chat questions here that I didn't open up until right now. Okay. All right. Well, you pleased with that, Steve? Randy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's more that I would even probably ask if the time allowed, but yeah, I'd like to definitely explore this more. It's just that yeah, we're almost at 2 hours. I can't believe we kept that many people that long. That's great. I mean, it's a good, we had a good turnout, and we had a good retention here. But the one thing I was just thinking quickly is the Spire in '77. Did that have a lot to do with the decision to move over from apples and fruit farming to Christmas trees. I would imagine it did, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, so the Christmas trees, my brother Barry, who was a jet propulsion engineer,
Mhm.
he started growing Christmas trees with his wife Jerry, who you know, right?
Mhm. Right.
Um, on a piece of the property that the Protenics used to own between our farm and Iker Road, I guess it is. It goes across Devil's Brook. Is that Iker Road? Yeah. And he just did it as a kind of a seasonal hobby, if you will, to begin with. But then he and Jerry saw its potential to be a little bit more than that. So they expanded it. Orchardside never grew any Christmas trees. It was never part of the Orchardside business. It was Barry's inception and development. Then when he passed away, he and Jerry gave the business to their two sons, Chris and Steve. And they grow Christmas trees. I didn't get into all these details, but primarily on land that used to be part of the farm, but that Barry and Jerry owned when they bought it from the farm and moved into the main house. Now they have a few trees planted on the remaining orchard-side land, but it's not an orchard-side business. It's Barclay's Tree Farm. Orchard-side's business is basically gone.
Okay.
Yeah,
We have, well, this is where it gets kind of complex. Orchardside LLC is a legal instrument that I developed to own and manage the remaining family farm. I guess that's the best way to put it. I own it with Jerry and my other sister-in-law, Joy. I used to own it with Barry, Ted, and myself, but then Ted and Barry passed away, and their ownership in the LLC went to Jerry and Joy respectively. So the three of us own what's left over of the Orchardside land, which is the land around the house. Jerry owns the house and 20 acres.
Okay.
That may be more than you wanted to know.
yeah.
But it's Barry and Jerry's business that they gave to Steve and Chris.
Okay.
Christmas trees have always been hobby farming, basically, for the most
Oh.
part.
Okay.
A little more involved in that, but not like the really large apple operations, I guess. So
Okay.
From my perspective in hindsight, and that's the way I wrote it, that the fire to me was really the end of Orchardside because it changed the operation so much. It wasn't the absolute chronological end because Ted and my father rebuilt the packing house and got all the machinery together to harvest apples for another few years. But, looking back on it, the fire was really the event that led up to the end of Orchardside. There were a lot of other things, market things that I mentioned, the retail versus the wholesale. That changed a lot, labor regulations. There were a lot of things working against Orchardside continuing to operate as it did. The fire was kind of an event that really pushed it over the brink from my perspective.
Okay. All right. Well,
You
Was there
still
another?
there, Steve? Steve?
Still here.
Oh, good. Did you like that?
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Where do you read my thing? I have to put a lot of pictures in it.
All right. I'm definitely looking forward to it.
But that Russian thing, I definitely want to put that in because I just wrote about that from memory. I don't remember how many there were. I remember this visit, and they were Russians, and a couple of things they were impressed by. But if I can include that clip in here, then at least it corroborates my memory.
Yeah, we can definitely find it. We'll scan it and send it over to you and into the library as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. We can learn how to make those drinks.
I
Interesting.
want to.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to scan the air photo that's back in the den of the house and the packing house. You know the photo I'm talking about, Steve?
Yep.
Because that would add a lot to what I've written, to be able to show the house and the packing house and the shop and all the workers' housing.
Sort of shows the destruction of the fire. That really was a really, really large fire. And to put it in perspective, I mean, we had, I don't know, 5 different townships come to help fight that. But on an interesting side note, my wife, she's from Hightstown. Her father was a firefighter in Hightstown for many, many years. And it was the first big fire he had ever been on.
No.
30 some odd years before my wife and I 50 years before my wife and I ever met. So.
Huh.
Interesting.
I remember, Stuart Long.
Yep.
Well, he was a elementary school classmate of mine. And I ran into him when he came to fight the fire.
Weird way to bring people together.
Okay. Again, thank you all. Thank you all for coming out and sharing. And we'll add this to the archives and hopefully have more to follow with these things and hear about what farming is like in South Brunswick today, Steve. So thanks to all. And if you have any questions after this, you can email me and I could ask Jack, Steve, or anybody else about them. So if anything we didn't cover tonight, just email me. You have my email address. I sent you the Zoom link, and we'll get back to you.
All right, and eventually I'll send you this document after I put it together with photographs.
All right, that sounds good. It sounds
All
good.
right.
All right, good night, everybody.
Take care.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.